recently I've been studying heavily Jewish philosophy aspect. Reading the Rambam. I got a book by Yoram Hazony. I've been really studying. Now, my question is this to you, Rabbi. Do you believe that the Mishnah is authoritative? Not that it's over Torah, obviously, because I've been listening, but in a sense that it should still be studied today or be grouped in as one of the core essences that one should study. Is one of the things I've been getting at recently is the philosophical aspects to it. Now, understanding that from my point of view that the Mishnah or the oral law was given by the Great Assembly. That is my belief, personal belief that I hold to. Do you think, in your opinion, it's still authoritative that one should follow those laws, or is it subject to personal opinion?
Mm-hmm. Good question. The laws laws that have been passed down through oral tradition, are they still applicable today?
So let me give people some context here. I believe that Deuteronomy chapter 17 commands us to listen to, at that time, the elders, which were made up of judges, priests, and Levites. Now, this court does exist throughout Jewish history. We have a whole book called Shoftim, Judges. It appears in 2 Chronicles as well. Like King Jehoshaphat, he reestablishes this court. This court takes on different names, again, from Beit Din HaGadol, the great court, the elders, the men of the Great Assembly, the judges, and ultimately the Sanhedrin. Israelites knew that ruling body that sat on the Temple Mount to the place that God will choose. That's what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 17, that they will rule from the place I will choose. And the elders weren't always in Jerusalem because God chose different places. It says that by listening to them, you're listening to me. Now, we believe that what appears in the Mishnah are the rulings of this court. Whether you want to believe that the rulings contained in there came from the men of the Great Assembly, regardless, it came through the court. And these laws were fluid. They were communal law that could be changed. Talmud teaches that a court of greater number and greater wisdom needs to be in play in order to change these laws. Now, that is what the oral law is, or what people call mistakenly the oral law. I don't even like that phrase. It only appears really twice in the Talmud. But halacha comes from what appears in the Mishnah. And technically, the Baraitot. The Baraitot are statements that didn't make it into the Mishnah, but the only binding portions of the Baraitot are called Toseftot. There's another segment of law called Midrashei Halacha, which is what appears in the Sifra, the Sifri, and the Mechilta, which are laws extracted from the Torah itself. And that's what Drash means, Torah. So Midrash is from the Torah, so Midrashei Halacha. It has nothing to do with what Midrash later means. So, of course, it's still binding nowadays. But the Mishnah is the oral law. As a matter of fact, it's the Gemara that's disposable. The Talmud is made up of two books. It's made up of the Mishnah and its commentary. The men in the Mishnah had what's called smicha, which is ordination going all the way back to Moses. God said that he's going to put on the elders what he put on Moses, and we see that Moses put that on Yehoshua, on Joshua. And that was the authority to judge. And we believe that it was passed down from teacher to student, all the way till the time that the court was completely dismantled and this ordination ceased after the destruction of the temple. So the Mishnah is the source of what people call oral law nowadays, and it's absolutely binding. But the confusion begins with the words of the Amoraim. So the words of the Amoraim are the words that appear in the Gemara. The Gemara are the commentaries to the Mishnah, and it has a lot more to say regarding what we call rabbinic law nowadays than even the Mishnah has to say. For example, I made a video recently on getting drunk on Purim, how I'm against the practice of getting drunk on Purim. So my first video that I made around 5 years ago was bringing down the Rambam's understanding of it, but the Rambam was just building off the words of the Amoraim, not the Tanaim. So this year, I took a step back and I saw that the whole notion of even drinking doesn't appear in the Mishnah. Well, not to mention getting drunk on Purim. This is only the words of the Amoraim, which tells you that there is no obligation to get drunk because it doesn't appear in the Mishnah. If something doesn't appear in the Mishnah, then it's just opinion. I just made a video on what people call pagam habrit. What that means to blemish the covenant, literally. But it's a notion of spilling seed. It has many names to it. Kiri, nocturnal emission. It was also tied into this prohibition that supposedly doesn't exist anymore called Takanas Ezra, that people couldn't even study Torah if they had some sort of emission. So then I started with the Torah. I saw there was just 3 verses. It had nothing to do with masturbation. It had nothing to do with it being an act that's frowned upon, just something that made you unclean, just like having a baby made you unclean. And then I hopped into the Mishnah. It was just one Mishnah that just said that people should be careful, but it embellished it. It said that the hand that checks himself, the male's hand should be cut off, but a woman who checks herself should be praiseworthy. So the understanding is that if a man checks himself after an emission, that could cause him to emit more semen. This is why it's problematic. And it ends there. And then the Amoraim come in. They're the ones who instituted this whole notion that if someone spills seed in any manner, that they lose their share in the world to come, that it's the worst commandment that one could commit in the Torah, that it's equivalent to worshiping idols, that every time that someone spilled seed, where they were giving birth to thousands of demons that attacked the Jewish people. And this is what they teach on YouTube nowadays. So we have all this nonsense built off the Amoraim, and people lost sight of what the Mishnah said, what the Tanaim had to say on the issue. What appears in the Mishnah, because with the people who existed before the Tanaim, like the Zugot, Ezra was in Atana, but from the Tanaim and before were men who had smicha, men who sat on the Sanhedrin, and the commandment in Torah is to listen to them, not to listen to people who came later on and start commenting on them. Right? Now, it's true. The Amoraim sometimes help us understand the context that the Tanaim are laying down, because they were ultimately the students of the Tanaim, the students of the students of the Tanaim, right? But nowadays, there's no distinction made between the words in the Gemara and the words in the Mishnah. But the absolute rule is that from a rabbinic perspective, you're only a heretic if you teach outside of the rulings that appear in the Mishnah. That means that you could disagree with Achronim and Rishonim and Amoraim, but you can't disagree with the Mishnah. And there's many ambiguous portions of the Mishnah, which means that you could do it this way and I could do it that way. And that's where the statement of Elu ve'elu divri Elokim Chaim steps in, that even these and all these different practices are also the word of God, because it came from the court. Even though it's presented to us in an ambiguous manner nowadays, if it came from the Sanhedrin, whether at that time the Sanhedrin was split, Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, who's right? They're both right. It's really the Amoraim that gave much preference to Hillel and not necessarily Shammai. But again, these are just Amoraim. So whoever builds rabbinic law outside of the Mishnah is what is classified as a heretic.